Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So today we start a new approach to the Dawah class, and that is the study of Iman by way of the Makkan Quran. And we started to introduce the idea of the objectives of the Quran. That's something that Brother Ahmed Shifa began to talk about. And before we were talking about the importance of the Quran in our lives as far as its teachings and as far as having a relationship with it. And what we meant by that is not necessarily the customary understanding of making sure that you have a portion of the Quran that you recite daily and perfecting your recitation. That's part of Quranic education, but more we were focusing on the issue of having a relationship to the Quran with regard to its study for reflection. And it doesn't matter if you were studying a surah of the Quran, a chapter of the Quran, and you stayed stuck on that for a long time. We have the example of the Sahabi, of the companion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was noted as always reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas. He was always reciting Qul Huwallahu Ahad on a regular basis. And so one of the things that we have to really reflect on is that in the early period of Islam, the Quran, as we mentioned many times, it was revealed gradually. And it was revealed in effect then portions at a time, and it necessarily wasn't done at one shot. And so we have to think about what that means with regard to those who were the recipients or those that were receiving the Quran. They had a lot of time to reflect upon the meanings of the Quran. It wasn't just an issue that they, now we have a lot of the concept of the rote memorization, and that has helped us greatly in preserving the Quran and how it's recited and its words and so on and so forth. But it hasn't necessarily helped us, with the culture that it has built with reflecting on its meanings. Now, if you combine a meticulous, perfect type of memorization of the Quran with reflecting on the Quran, then that's a whole different dynamic. And we've seen that, we've seen people that are dynamic in their recitation of the Quran from the angle that no matter where you ask them to recite from in the Quran, instantaneously they can do it. I'll never forget when I was in Egypt and I was in Madinat al-Buhuth. And Madinat al-Buhuth is it's like the lower level educational sector for those who are trying to get into Azhar. And so there were some students that came from Cameroon. And I remember one of the teachers was testing a student in Quran, and he was playing with him. He was playing with him because the guy was so meticulous in his recitation. He was like a computer. So he would ask him, recite from here. And then the guy would start reciting. And then he would stop him. Well, go back over here. And then he would go back over there and recite from there. And he wouldn't budge. It would be within a matter of seconds that he would adjust his mind. And he would be able to jump from this portion of the Quran to that portion of the Quran with an exactitude that was like amazing, right? And so if you have that type of dominance over your memory, and at the same time you're reflecting upon the Quran and its meanings, that's like the best model that could ever be. You see what I'm saying? But everybody's not like that. And we don't want to discourage, especially us in the West. We don't memorize in the West, right? Our concept of education is a little bit different. And we've heard students over and over again, they complain about that if you push them too hard on the issue of memorization, then they get frustrated because they're not, their brains are not prepared for that. That doesn't mean that you can't achieve it, but it takes a little more work. But if you ask them reflective questions, if you ask them to think, they may be more open to that. Right? But again, when we start talking about the companions, they combine memorization with reflection and action. That's the three areas, and so that gave them a difference. And we were talking about that now we're starting to uh, give more focus to this idea of studying belief or Iman from the Quran itself, right? And so each week we're going to try to change. Like one week will be Ahmed, one week will be me, and then what we're going to do is organize the class in such a way that we have topics that are clearly worked out, because there's going to be two different approaches, right? And so, but we're sticking with our idea of the education of the Quran in our preparation for understanding our own deen and for da'wah itself. Like, how do we deal with ourselves and how do we deal with the people, right? And so we have to have that clear understanding that the first generation, what they had was the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Quran, and it was being revealed gradually. And so that had a massive impact on them, right? It had a massive impact on them. And so when we look at Surah Takwir, it takes its name from the surah itself, the idea of folding up, right? And so this surah is one of the earliest surahs to be revealed in Mecca. And so we can talk about the early phase of Mecca, the mid phase of Mecca, the late phase of Mecca, all before Hijrah, before they move from Mecca and they go to Medina. That's the importance of studying the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It gives you that background, right? It gives you that background, and it fills in the details for you. What was going on, so that you can create like a movie in your mind about what was happening, right? And so the early phase in Mecca, there was not a lot of opposition. Opposition meaning there was not tension, right? There was not a lot of rejection necessarily to the da'wah, to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, encouraging the people to believe in Allah and encouraging to change certain things within themselves with regard to the character. And in the early phase of Mecca, there was not emphasis placed on rules, right? Where this is where we go wrong in our time, that we've turned Islam into rules, and then the whole issue of having that relationship with the Quran, with ourselves, with Allah, ultimately. See what I'm saying? And the whole issue of building our character, that is something that is missing. That's something that's missing. So in that early phase, there was not opposition. Quraysh, in other words, was that dominant tribe in the Arabian Peninsula. They took care of the Kaaba, and they found themselves to be the leaders, of the city of Mecca, and they found themselves to be the caretakers of the Kaaba, and they were clear that they had some sort of rank. They didn't give the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam a lot of opposition. They were not opposed in the early phase as much as what we begin to see in the mid phase to the late phase before they have to leave. And who's they? Before the companions. That means los discípulos del profeta y el profeta. The disciples of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Prophet. They didn't have to leave, until late, in the da'wah. So we're talking about closer to when you start getting into like the 10th year is really becoming seriously a problem. The 13th year, they're headed off. And so the Quran, the tone of the Quran in that phase, that late phase, is you're going to see this a little more intense, because now you have these people that are opposing the messenger, right? And they're not only opposing the messenger, they're being violent towards the messenger. And the messenger and the community of belief is not being violent toward them. And so when you go to the early phase, which is what Surah Takwir, is in that early phase, what you begin to see is certain lessons. Like, first of all, Surah Takwir is composed of 29 ayat of the Quran. And two main focus points of the surah are talking about the issue of the hereafter, that there's this concept of the hereafter. More specifically, because the hereafter has different names. And those different names give you different insights, right? So here he's talking about haqiqatul qiyamah, the reality of standing, the day of standing. It's not just like Yawm al-Akhir, the last day, right? Or it's not just the issue of like al-ba'th, like resurrection. Is pinpointing on this idea that there's this standing meaning accountability, right? And the surah itself is not only focusing on the human being, right, coming to account. The surah itself is talking about how it is that the creation itself changes. Not just the human being, but here it starts with, when the sun shall be coiled up and when the stars shall be scattered about and when the mountains shall be set in motion. They lose their stability. And the mountains, even scientifically, we know they are very stable objects. Because when you look at a mountain, you only see the part that's protruding out, that's sticking out, right? Just like a tree, right? But then you know that the tree has roots that make that thing firm. And actually, I was visiting a friend a few weeks back. He has a lot of trees in his backyard, and it's very windy because it's up north, right? And so he's like, these trees are amazing as a creation of Allah. Because I sit here, and the trees, when the wind comes, I feel like I'm scared that they're going to, tip over or something like that. The wind is going to knock them down, but they don't. They stay in their place and they just move like this. So, but then when you think about that type of creation, the trees have deep roots, and the mountains are like that. When you look at them scientifically, the mountains, they're deeply rooted. So here the Quran is saying that's gone. That stability on that day is gone. You see what I'm saying? Like everything that you felt that was permanent or was in order, it goes into disorder, right? And so you get this feeling like, whoa, like what is it that's going on? And when the pregnant camel shall be discarded, that may not make sense to us. But if you think about one of the best cars, right, that you can think about, one of the best vehicles, name the best car that you would like to have, right? And that car is just abandoned for anybody to take it. It's not taken care of, it's just, and in this case, the camel was life. Not only transportation, but the meat, the skin of the camel, the milk of the camel, right? And the fact that the camel has a child, you know what I'm saying? It is talking about riches. It's talking about sustenance, right? You have to understand that the camel in that environment is a special animal because it can survive in that environment. And that environment, that desert environment in the Arabian Peninsula is an extremely harsh environment. If you're out at the wrong time during the day, you're gone. If you're in a place and you don't know how to make your way through the desert, you can lose your sense of direction. So the stars give you a sense of direction. You see what I'm saying? Even the mountains, knowing that this mountain is over here, there, it gives you a sense of direction and orientation. You know where there's shelter. So you're talking about life itself being completely disrupted, right? And when the beast shall be corralled, and you have to understand, like animals in this environment, we think about animals in a different way because we think about animals in zoos, we think about pets, we think about animals being controlled, but in this environment, it's a wild environment. And so this is talking about how now all the animals will come together. They will even be in fear, in other words, right? And when the seas shall rise mightily, right? The water, the ocean now and the earth, the ocean and the earth, or water and the earth, there's an imbalance. We know that the majority, when we look at the globe, that understanding we have now because of pictures and so on and so forth. But if you really think about it, the face of the earth, majority of it is water. So if there's any imbalance that takes place there, we're done. Even with the movement of the sun itself. If the sun moves by any degrees, it could be the end of our lives. So everything is in its perfect balance right now. And and when the soul shall be paired off, now people are being grouped into where they're going. What community are they part of? In other words, you see what I'm saying? And then what's amazing here, I've been reflecting on this sort of for a while now, because this ayat comes in the middle of all of this to a people who it didn't really matter much, right? And when the buried infant shall be asked, he is talking about the live burial of women or young girls in this case. And it comes in this whole context, like the Quran focuses on this point, right? And when the burial, can you close that door? Thank you. And when the buried infant shall be asked, for what sin was she killed? And so the Quran is highlighting, in this case now, the transformation that is actually beginning to take place, even with regard to the role of women in this society, right? And that reality of the murder of those girls, it will be, that people will be brought to account for that. See what I'm saying? That's something that will come to an end, but not only come to an end with the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, but it's an actual, reality at which people have to be held accountable. Right? And when the scroll shall be unrolled, what people have done, and that's what I find amazing about the way that this combination of the ayats, that it is talking about women, right? That's not to say, and it's erroneous to think that women in every tribe of the those who were in the Arabian Peninsula, that they had the same status, because that's not true. You understand what I'm saying? Not women, not all women had the same status in every tribe, and not every tribe killed women like this. It was just that it was a reality that was there, that was dominant. It was a different type of society. And so, but the amazing thing is that after this ayah is brought out about people being taken into account and the innocence of those, for the killing of those women and their innocence, the scroll shall be unfolded. You see what I'm saying? Like the accountability is brought together, because the ayat of the Quran, they have meaning in their own form. You see what I'm saying? Like it's not like this is an action that there won't be any account for. Everything prior to is talking about the creation, right? It's talking about the heavens. It's talking about the sea, right? It's talking about the animals. Now we go into the human realm, and how and the issue of the disregard for human life in the case of the destruction of women, and that really in many ways signifies the end of life, right? Because if you think about, imagine if a whole society were to generalize the idea of just killing women. You know what I'm saying? Would life continue? You see, would the birth cycle continue? In the meaning of motherhood, would it continue? Yeah, you can say the same thing about men, but here men can only produce to a certain extent. Women are the ones that bring life into its full capacity. See what I'm saying? Men are part of that, but women nurture that to the fullest level. So when that's gone, you know what I'm saying? The society itself is wrecked on another level, and it kind of brings us to this whole debate what's going on in this society right now with the whole issue of Roe versus Wade, because there's too many extremes. You see what I'm saying? One side, it just goes with the abortion 100%, like no responsibility, no nothing. The other side just said no abortion at all, period. Regardless of is it rape, regardless of his incest, regardless of whether the woman's health, is at stake. There's in Islam, it's a case by case basis, but it's not at the level of what we see in this society. because it's irresponsible on both sides. And it's definitely, what we were talking about before. It's the life killing a woman is, it's not aborting them in the womb, it's aborting them after the womb. You see what I'm saying? As soon as they're born, you bury them alive. So now you begin to see that shift, right? And then that shift where the human reality is brought into play, and then now we come back, and when heaven shall be scraped off, and when hell shall be stoked, and when paradise shall be brought near, and then now and we come back to the responsibility of the human being. Then each soul shall know what it had brought forth, and then now we come back to the order of the world, right? So the Quran now is bringing, after the Quran is telling us there'll be a day when there's an account that has to be made. And that day will disrupt the order of the creation itself outside of the human being. Now the Quran is bringing us back to the order. No, I swear by the alternating stars, which circled in high, and by the night when it recedes, and the morning when it breaks. And all that is brought out. That sense of like, wow, it's intense. You see what I'm saying? It's an intense moment when everything is disoriented and people are brought to account. And the human is not just going to leave this world, like for instance, like the way that the rest of the creation is disoriented. The human is going to come to account. You see what I'm saying? It's not going to be like the way the animals leave out, or the way that the sun is taken out of its orbit, or the way that the disruption that takes place with the sea, and that's it. It's not just like a disruption and that's it. For the human being, it's a disruption of the order of life and an account, and then the destiny of where that human being is going after that, which shows that the role of the human being is very unique. And so imagine this in an environment which is chaotic. This message that's coming in an environment which is chaotic, in an environment in which the woman has no value, in which the weak person has no value. If you don't have tribal strength, you have no value. You see what I'm saying? In which life itself may not seem to even have value. Because it's a society in which it's known that the people of the Arabian Peninsula, they used to celebrate drinking, like we see in our society at a very high level. It was in their poetry, it was in their music, it was in their festivities, it was a lifestyle. And so now the Quran is, after it talks about the first theme, which is the hereafter, the day of Qiyamah, or the reality of what Qiyamah means, the standing. Now it goes into the issue of revelation itself and prophethood. Why? Because at that point in time, in the early period, there was no violent opposition to the prophet, but they did challenge that he was a prophet. They did challenge the reality of the Quran, right? So the Prophet ﷺ was considered to be insane. The Prophet ﷺ was considered to be mumbling the inspiration of the devil. This is how the Quran was characterized. The words of insanity, the inspiration of the devil, right? And so the Quran negates that. It is truly the discourse of a noble messenger. And in this case, Jibreel. It's coming from Jibreel. That's one understanding of it. The other understanding it could be that is the Prophet ﷺ himself. In this case, both are messengers. Jibreel is a messenger, the Prophet is a messenger. Who has power with the Lord of the throne and highly pleased. Obeyed, then trustworthy. And then here is interesting. It called the Quran here is describing who the Prophet is. Your companion is not mad. Not mad meaning not insane, not crazy. But here the Quran is describing the Prophet as your companion. You know who this person is. The yani sahibukum, right? Sahibukum is a person. It's not just somebody that is in the same environment. It's someone that if you have suhbah with the person, you spend time with the person. And if you spend time with the person, that means you have some understanding of who that person is. So the Quran is, correcting that reality. It's negating that, okay, who you say the prophet is not who the prophet is. The prophet is not insane. The prophet is not inspired by the devil, or what's being said is not from shaitan or some jinn or whatever you. He saw him upon the luminous horizon. It was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he does it with regard to the unseen, the knowledge of the unseen. He doesn't hold back that knowledge which is necessary. He's not keeping secrets, not like magicians do that. People that practice magic. Como la santería, la brujería, esa cosa así. And it's not the discourse of a devil that's a curse. And then the Quran said, where are you going with this? Right? Where are you going with this? What path are you taking in terms of your relationship with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? In one case, you're saying that he's crazy. In another case, you're saying he's possessed. Right? And then even we know by the seerah that they even started to accuse him that he wanted a power. You know what I'm saying? That he wanted power. And so the Quran affirms itself. It is only a reminder to all of humanity. Right? To whoever of you who wishes to reform their ways. But you will not wish unless Allah, the one who sustains the creation itself, Rabbul Alameen, wishes. In other words, that guidance comes from Allah. It's not, you can't just guide yourself in the process. That doesn't mean that people are misguided and they have no responsibility to transform themselves. Because if that was the case, that would be a contradiction. Some people have that understanding of qadr, which is not a solid understanding, which they forget that the human being has a special role in the universe. The human being has that reality of choice, making choices. And so that first set of ayat is talking to us about the reality that there is a hereafter. There is some sort of resurrection after death. There is some disruption that takes place in the world. The world is not eternal. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't maintain itself alone. Allah sustains it. That's another thing, that the word Rabbul Alameen is being used here with regard to the creation itself. The creation is not God. The creation is sustained by God. Because, we have that belief in the world. Not us as Muslims, but we have some people that believe that the universe is God. That the creation is God itself. But the face of God is hidden, right? And you only see one part. You only see the face at face value, the external part, but in reality, it is God. So then everything is God. That's not, the Quran is clearly talking about how the creation itself is sustained by God, Rabbul Alameen. And part of the Quranic story about life itself is here. They're saying that, look, there will come a time when this, by the command of God, will be disrupted and another reality will manifest itself. That is to get us to reflect upon who is Allah, the one that creates, the one that sustains, but also the one that, has power, the one that brings the judgment. Those things, are important. And then, of course, like we said, the other thing that comes up is the issue of what is revelation itself and prophethood. It's not necessarily saying everything directly, but it's negating. Está negando lo que ellos están diciendo. Right? It's negating what they claim. Porque lo que están diciendo es embustes. Right? They're not, they know who the prophet is. Alayhi salatu wasalam. They know that he's trustworthy. Right? There's nothing in his character to kind of to blame him for, to say that he would be like this, but and yet they invent those lies. And so the Quran is clarifying what prophethood is in Revelation, and then it's challenging the people at the end of the day. So what's the position that you're going to take? You see what I mean? What is the position that you're going to take? But how is it doing it? It's not doing it like coming into your face. See what I'm saying? It's saying like, well, this is not the case. 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 But what is the case is that this is from God, it's revelation. This person is guided to teach us. What's your conclusion? You see what I'm saying? What's your conclusion about this? So when we talk about the issue of da'wah, we have to already have that understanding, even for ourselves. And when we teach our children or when we teach people around us, Quran is not forcing. All of this prior to talking about the prophethood itself is getting us to reflect. And unfortunately, sometimes because of the Arabic missing, we don't get the full impact. See what I'm saying? But that doesn't mean that because we don't get the full impact that there is no impact. Right? That's why it's important for us to study the Quran systematically so that we can take benefit from it, so we can get some impact from it, right? So this is different. This is a different discussion on Iman than what we see goes on amongst the Muslims. Right? This is a discussion which includes our reflection, because there's two reflections on the creation here. One when the creation goes out of order, and then the order of the creation itself. So the Quran is getting us to reflect on how it is that Allah maintains, so that we reach some understanding of who Allah is. You see what I'm saying? So two things that are very clear here, or we could say three things even, that are very clear about who Allah is. Allah is the creator. Allah is the sustainer. Right? And Allah is the one that we have to give account to, right? And by Allah being the sustainer, the creation itself, including ourselves, everything is dependent upon Allah. See, that's a different way of teaching Iman. It's a different way of teaching belief. It's a different way of teaching who Allah is. Right? It's a way which gives us a picture. It gives us some sort of picture in our mind about what it is that we believe, versus arguing over what it is that we believe, right? Or versus just telling us we believe this, but there's no reflection that's going on. Right? There's no film that you can generate in your mind somewhat that will allow you to come back and kind of affirm your belief more, right? Make your belief more strong, because it's kind of, you can picture this stuff that's going on. Not only that, here the Quran is talking about the unseen, what will happen, right? Because these things that the Quran started to talk about with regard to the sun, with regard to the sea, with regard to the mountains, the stars, that's from the unseen. It's not happening now. But the Quran comes, it gives us this picture of the unseen, of what will come, and then it brings us to what it is that we can see with regard to the stars, with regard to the sun. See what I'm saying? With regard to the world itself. So that when we reflect upon the world, when we reflect upon the sun, when we reflect upon the stars, when we reflect upon the ocean, all of those things become signs for us of what? Of the existence of Allah, of the way that Allah maintains the world, and of the day of Qiyamah itself. So then our reading of the world, our reading of life itself, right, always has the two sides to it. That we, in this world, it has meaning to it, but also we know that another world is coming. So everything is constantly reminding us, of who Allah is and our purpose in the world and what is to come, right? And so that type of understanding is what the companions were being built on little by little, little by little. All of that came before this whole issue of rules. Don't do this, do that. And even the Quran, the Quranic way of talking about right or wrong in essence was not necessarily 100% in rules the way that we make it. It was an issue of weighing harm and benefit. Where's the benefit at for you? You know, we make it more like rules, right? Because that's our reflection, like it's just, you know, rigid rules. But that's not the Quranic approach. The Quranic approach is getting us to think about why it is that we're doing what we do, the value of it. And then, you know, our commitment, like asking ourselves, like, where do we stand with this? Huh?
I think sometimes we're not ready. Like, si solo leemos como reglas, no nos vamos a sentir preparados para that.
And that's the reality. That reality where she mentioned is the same reality that was
other side of the.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she's saying that we take the deen like rules.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I mentioned it here. I know I've mentioned it in the khutbah before. Aisha was asked about what was the first of the Quran to be revealed, radiallahu anha. And one thing to keep in mind that's extremely important is that it was mentioned the issue about the unseen, that the Quran was talking about the unseen, the hereafter, right? If the Quran is talking about the hereafter, the Quran is also talking about the value of good deeds, the value of doing good. Right? That it has good, doing good has value in itself, that the world is, life is meaningful. On the other side, it was mentioned that the people said, yeah, because if the first to be revealed were that you have to stop drinking, we would never have stopped drinking. If the first to be revealed that we would have to, we couldn't have relationship with whoever we wanted, then we would never have stopped that. And so here, from a point of Dawah, that's where we get the transformative power of the Quran. See, we want to violate the methodology of the Quran, and we want to come with our own methodology that it violates not only the methodology of the Quran, but human nature itself. No one grows overnight to be an adult. It's a process. You see what I'm saying? And even when it comes to the issue of habit transformation does not take place instantaneously. Even when it comes to the issue of physical development, like exercising and this and that, you're not going to grow muscles overnight. Whether it's weight loss, strength, the same thing with education when it comes to being a doctor or a mechanic or even learning a job that you go to. Being a manager, being behind a cash register, whatever it may be, everything is a process. But when it comes to the issue of da'wah, we forget that we're dealing with human beings, and we keep, for whatever reason, can keep thinking religion is something that doesn't have to follow any process. You see what I'm saying? And this is where we go wrong with ourselves and others, and this is where we begin to frustrate people and push them out. What happens when the conditions at a job don't create an environment in which people can feel that they can grow in it? After a while, people become frustrated and they quit, they leave. You see what I'm saying? Or they become dysfunctional. They're not as productive, right? And so that's going to be the same thing with the issue of practicing the deen. There's no doubt about that. That's why the deen, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we mentioned this before, if there were two things that were halal, the Prophet chose the easiest. Some people don't like that because they think that being religious means taking the hard path on everything. You see what I'm saying? But what we don't realize is that life has become more difficult on many fronts for people. Even if people say, well, life was easier back then. On some things, yes, and on some things, no. People they didn't have to work all day, right, in order to get water in order to have shelter. They worked maybe for other things, like they maybe worked on, a farm, or maybe they tended to animals or this or that, but they didn't have to work for the basics of life in the way that human beings today's time have to work for the basics of it. Every single thing you have to work for because you have to pay cash for it. And if you don't have the cash, you can't sustain life. Whereas in the past, you can drop some seeds in a particular area. The sustenance comes from the ground, or there's animals that roam. You take care of them a little bit. You have the certain things you have in place. So yes, there were difficulties, but the stress on some things was not there. And today's time, the stress that human beings have is by far on another level than what it was in the past. That's why we have so many mental health issues. You see what I'm saying? Whereas people, they may have had stress before, but they were healthier physically. You know what I'm saying? They had a tribe, a family to maintain themselves. They weren't living in the world as an individual. They weren't at a point where if I can't do XYZ, I'm homeless. You see what I'm saying? They were not living in that way. So we shouldn't compare things to think that they're exactly the same. And one of the Mashaykh, he said that one of the things that we have to look at, هذا العصر غير مسبوق, that this time period, there's no precedence for it. There may be some things that look like they're in the past, and we tried to say, well, it's the same thing. No, but it's not the same. This time period is unlike any other time period. And the things that we see, what we experience. And another thing that we have to realize is that in this time period, the human being has changed. The human being has way more feelings that they're dealing with than emotions. Children at a young age have tons of feelings that they're dealing with, hardcore feelings. You see what I'm saying? And that's not something that people dealt with. The level of loneliness and separation that people feel from others, this was not something that people experienced in the same way. Those things may have been there, but not the same level of intensity. And so when we talk about facilitating in the deen, that's a Quranic principle, because life is already difficult for people. We don't want their practice of religion to be an obstacle for them to connect with God. You see what I'm saying? We want their practice of religion to be the way that life is facilitated for them to reach God, to make life easier for them. Because if they have difficulty in their daily sustenance and living and functioning, and then difficulty in the religion, something is going to break and give, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing of facilitating for the people, especially we see that people are broken, or see that people are struggling, or we see that people, they need to go in stages, stage by stage. See what I'm saying? It's not bad. Like a brother, he was telling me recently, he said, I struggle with salah. And I know that he's a new Muslim. And he said, in the beginning, I was praying all my 5 prayers, and now I'm not. You know what I'm saying? And so it's easy to tell them, well, yeah, you have to pray. Yeah, you have to. It's easy to tell them that. You see what I'm saying? He already knows that. That's why he's telling me that he's struggling with the prayer. I don't have to remind him of his struggle. Mm-hmm. My job is tabshir, is his bushra. My job is to give the person hope and good tidings, and encourage them. That's our job. That's what the Quran comes in those time periods in which the Prophet ﷺ is going through hardship. The Quran is not coming to put more hardship on the Prophet ﷺ. The Quran is coming to ease and give hope to the Prophet ﷺ to make it through the hardship, right? And so to continue moving forward. And that's how our dawah has to be. Life itself has its own difficulties. And so that's why when we look at what is important here, what's important at least in this aspect of teaching what Iman is belief in the unseen and good deeds, right? And the issue of who is the Prophet ﷺ. And if the Prophet ﷺ is not a sense of hope, is not a sense of that Allah cares for us, there's something wrong in our belief. Something wrong in our belief. Because that means that it's just life in the same way. You know what I'm saying? Trouble, hardship, despair, you know what I'm saying? Problems, stress, worry, sadness. We're just staying there with the religion. You see what I'm saying? And if we're just staying there with the religion, if that's what we have, we're neither going to grow here with the religion, and neither are we going to function in life. So, like I said, something is going to break, right? So this message was a message of hope to people that were broken. You know what I'm saying? And so that's something that we have to imitate. And in this case, in Surah Takwir is clarifying for us what is the message of the Quran. Right? It's a reminder of who we are. It's a reminder of life, the meaning of life, the reality of life, the responsibility that we carry. And it's a reminder that there is good, that good is rewarded. You know, but at the same time, it's a warning that we're held to account. You know what I'm saying? We're held to account. But it's a reminder that, you know, there is such a thing as Jannah. There's a reminder that we just didn't come into the world and that's it. Those meanings have to be very clear for us. And whenever we deal with the people, that's what we have to, you know, we have to go to those core meanings and communicating that to the people. That, for me, takes precedence over rules. Because you can try to impose someone's salah, you can try to impose someone, do this, don't do that. And if they don't have these things in their heart, then they don't have a foundation, because it's only a certain amount of time before you're going to break with the rules. But what is the motivator? In this case, the motivator is that relationship with Allah. So if we're discovering that in our salah or in our communication with Allah, there's sweetness, there's joy, there's tranquility, there's refuge, there's help, there's aid, all those good things that we need to function and survive in life healthily, you know what I'm saying, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. If we find the SLR, we will find that we correct ourselves to go back. Or we'll tell ourselves, you know what, I need to correct myself. You know what I'm saying? But if we're not finding that, we're not going to correct ourselves in that. We're gonna numb ourselves to whatever it is that we're dealing with, and we're going to drown in our problems and so on and so forth. And that's not what the case is. So here the Prophet ﷺ is coming, you know, as rahmatan lil alameen. And it's important that that's clear for us. And so, you know, with that we end. Assalamu alaikum.